Hi, and welcome to my very first video essay. Today we will be talking about horror movies and how they basically showed the fears of society throughout the decades. So we'll be starting in the 20s and then kind of work our way up to our current year. Okay, so in the 1920s we had very famous movies such as Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde or Nosferatu. Nosferatu being a movie about vampires, or a vampire, better said, and the one about Dr. Hyde and his friends. Well, they're about doctors. Basically, those were the two famous movies. We also had The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, is what it's called. I believe I wrote some of the movies down, so if I'm looking to the side, that's why. But yeah, basically, our new themes in horror for this decade were vampires and doctors. An interesting combination, isn't it? Yeah. Basically, the vampire trend kind of, well, it never really stopped, has it? But it kind of went, it started in the 20s and went back in the 30s. So we'll be covering more about this in the next decade. And in this one, we'll be focusing on the doctors. So if you look at society and kind of what their day-to-day was like and the issues they're facing, I think doctors being so often seen on the screen, especially in horror, makes a lot of sense. Basically, what was the main issue was the Spanish flu. And I mean, if you think about it, it's a virus, obviously, right? It's a sickness. And kind of so is vampirism. So I feel like if you actually think about how new vampires are being born, right? It's when you get too close to someone and bite them and throw out blood, which is actually a way real sicknesses, in our world, are being transferred from one person to another. So basically vampires were kind of a metaphor for the virus. Or a way to kind of cope with what was going on. It's a less obvious one than the doctors, but it still is one, and that's kind of why vampires started during that era, because they're also very exotic, especially in the way they are portrayed. We'll be covering more of this in the next decade, but yeah, it's the vampire connection to the Spanish flu, basically just vampirism being a virus. Also, if you think about it back then, or even Twilight, vampires don't talk about being a vampire that greatly. It's not a flex for them. They don't want to be one. It's a curse, It's a death sentence. Just like the Spanish flu. But yeah, doctors, obviously, I mentioned two movies, and both movies, basically what they cover story-wise is just doctors conducting weird experiments. And I think this also kind of shows the mistrust in doctors. If you think about it, they had doctors, but still a lot of people were dying, so they must be doing something wrong, right? They must be doing something suspicious. We can't trust them. And I feel this is basically how that issue was kind of treated and coped with, on film. Yeah, those were the main issues and plot points in the 20s. Also, we had a lot of xenophobia, which again ties in with the vampires being strange, exotic creatures who don't bring any good things into your country. And also it was post-World War I. So again, it's just kind of all tying together. Then we move into the 30s. Okay, so most of the issues from the 20s continue on into the 30s, such as xenophobia, and it's still being post-World War I. And how those issues are kind of being treated or covered. In horror movies, they're monsters. I've previously mentioned the vampires, but not only they were important, but also the Mummy, Frankenstein, and Werewolf of London were all important and famous movies which came out in the 1930s. They covered exotic monsters, but also the most well-known ones. If I asked you to name me one monster, it would probably be one of those I've previously mentioned. It started out in the 1930s with the whole xenophobia and racism thing, basically. This was because they were exotic monsters, especially if you think about the Mummy. It was a pharaoh in its past life, basically, and there it probably lived in Egypt. We don't really know the people from Egypt. There's no way to travel that far for the common man. They must be weird. And I feel like this could have been the thought process. I don't know, but like, yeah, basically all these weird monsters, especially if the weird mannerisms tie into the whole xenophobia. We don't know them. They're weird, could be scary kind of thing. And lots of the movies I've mentioned are based on books such as Dracula or Frankenstein. Frankenstein being by Mary Shelley, and Dracula being a book I'm actually currently reading. And I wouldn't recommend it. It's basically just a whole diary with the protagonist dying within the first few chapters. But a lot of times in the books, something certain about Dracula is being mentioned, and it's him not being from America or London, I think. I think it's him not being from London. That's where main protagonist is from, I believe. And basically, his strange mannerisms and etiquette and behaviors and palish skin due to him living in a Slavic region, oftentimes mentioned in a specific context. So I think like this kind of shows that my xenophobia theory, it's not too far off, right? Yeah, but again, 1930s, the exotic monsters were being born. Well, except for the vampire, it just continued. In the 1940s, the monster, or shall I say beast trend, kind of continued with movies such as The Wolfman or I Walked with a Zombie. Basically the kind of topic in this decade were still monsters, but more like the beastie ones with like that rage and energy inside you that's just waiting to be released, basically. And the whole topic for her was like the beast within, if you could say it like that. I mentioned a werewolf movie, and I feel like he is the perfect monster example. But it's because werewolves are basically a normal person. Just like living their day-to-day lives, just as you would. But then at a certain moment, they just snap and kind of unleash all their inner emotions, And I feel like this kind of shows it perfectly, especially with it being wartime. It kind of showed, like, you never know. You never know, like, your neighbor or, like, your colleague. You could never know, like, yeah, okay, like 30 days out of the month, they're being normal. But, like, when it's full moon, they change. So yeah, again, this is just, like, society dealing with the whole war things and kind of having trust issues, you could say, like when it comes to just people and their whole essence, basically. I think the movies really capture it, especially the werewolf example I just gave you. Yeah, you can kind of explore a bit more about it, but I feel like everything's really obvious, so I just move on to the 50s now. Okay, in the 50s we had kind of a lot societal issues, so I have my tablet here for this one. Basically, we had a lot of sci-fi movies, and this was because we were researching space. Basically, we had movies such as The Invasion of Body Snatchers or The Day the Earth Stood Still. And I feel like they basically just like show the fears that come along with space research. You must think about, like, right now we're researching Mars and everything, and people have been to the moon, everything, but like back then, it was really new. It was like something you couldn't even imagine. It was like if I told you we would, I don't know, like shrink ourselves and explore what it's like to be inside a chair, which is probably someone's kink, to be fair, but I was just trying to think of an example that seems just like as far away as space seemed for them. And especially because we've already covered all the xenophobia the people had, this also translated to aliens, basically. Or like their fears did, at least. And they didn't know what to expect, and they were scared, like there could be aliens, they could be like body snatchers. They could just swap out my wife for one of them and I'd never notice. Imagine I said that in like a country southern accent. But like, yeah, I feel like this also covered these fears really well, just like the fear of science is still prevalent today, I feel, for lots of people, especially the uneducated ones. But like back then, science wasn't a new thing, but it was still making such big steps, society was really skeptical, which I don't think we can blame them for, but this is how they coped. Also, we had the Cold War threats and just like communism scaring Americans basically. And we had the Americans feeling guilt about dropping the nuclear bombs on Japan, which resulted in movies like Godzilla. I'm sure you've heard of it. I'm not sure if you've seen it. I actually have not, but I feel like we all know the plot. We all know the monster. Again, kind of continuing a little bit with the monster trend. Godzilla basically, I think, being a monster born from radiation, actually. Born. And destroying cities. I feel like the connection is pretty obvious, like they feel bad over what they did and what the consequences could be, and the consequences could be like a Godzilla. That's not quite how radiation poisoning works. I'm not sure if you've played Fallout. I have, so I feel like I'm kind of an expert here. I've played like 3 of the Fallout, so maybe half my expert. But yeah, basically Godzilla was like this huge monster and like a manifestation of the guilt they had or what happened. And I think that's it for the 50s. Okay, over to the 60s now. I feel like now it's getting more interesting, also a bit more relatable. I feel like now we're getting to the movies you probably could have seen, especially if you're kind of a film snob. Because like I feel like starting with Godzilla, those are the movies we should have seen. Also, we're slowly moving from the like black and white movies to the colored ones, basically. Yeah. Okay, in the 1960s, we had movies such as The Night of the Living Dead and Rosemary's Babies, which both cover very different issues or topics of the 60s. The first one, The Night of the Living Dead, being about zombies, obviously. Just like a movie I mentioned, like you've probably seen both of them if you're into horror, or like at least, like certain scenes from it, which are just like, not must-sees, but Yeah, because The Night of the Living Dead covered zombies, and basically, from what I've read, I'm not too sure. But yeah, basically, zombies were rooted in the African voodoo tradition. I'm not saying zombies are part of this type of spiritual and or religious practice. But what I'm saying is they were kind of portrayed that way in movies. Kind of. Not necessarily in examples I found, but like this is kind of what I read online about zombies. I feel like you could interpret it a lot into zombies, like a lot. Depending like from where you're coming from, from like each decade. But given what was going on in society, I feel like it makes sense. Because like in the 60s, with like all the civil rights movements and like basically this strive for progression, especially from the younger people, with the older people, most of the time their parents still being xenophobic idiots, basically, right? And I feel like, it kind of makes sense, especially, so like, yeah, zombies basically showed the mob mentality, and it was just like zombies versus propaganda, and just like being, like all these protests, you're all like in the same mentality, the mob mentality. Zombies have this too. Look what happens to them. Look how stupid they are. And I feel like it kind of shows the conflict. And going back to the civil rights issues, women's rights were actually being talked about finally. And especially bodily anatomy. And this can be seen again, as I mentioned, in Rosemary's Baby, which also is a pretty famous horror movie, and it kind of shows like one of the first movies with a female, I guess you could say protagonist, just like more focusing on women now, because we've had a lot of monster movies, but before that we've had a lot of doctor movies, and of course all the doctors in the movies were male. And now that women are asking for rights, they're also the villains in movies. I think better said the subject. Sorry. So yeah, I think that's interesting trend that's starting, and we'll be definitely coming back to that. Now we're going into the 70s. Okay, the 70s were a pretty brutal decade, and therefore slashers were being born, with movies such as Halloween, which also kind of started the trend of having our final girl, which I think is a really interesting trope. But I'm trying not to go too depth into tropes right now because it's not the topic of the video. But if you're interested about just like multiple horror tropes or just like this one, leave a comment down below because I have my theories, as I do here. But like, yeah, it was a really brutal decade and serial killers were well out there, like the 70s and 80s. Have you seen the Brooklyn Nine-Nine clip where they're just so shook at how these two lazy detectives, such as Scully, have so many arrests, and they basically just say, oh yeah, well, New York in the 70s was basically like the purge, and I think that describes it pretty well. Yeah, but not only that was an issue, but also religious fears. In 1966, the Church of Satan was founded and, growing and gaining more members throughout the 70s. And this, in my opinion, also shows in movies such as Carrie. Yeah, one of my favorite movies was made in 76. Yeah, Carrie is gonna be a movie we will be diving a bit into deeper now. Okay, as I said, we've kind of started the trend of now having female protagonists and also female final girls. Very interesting, very nice. Carrie is basically a girl. She's a girl, obviously. I don't think her dad is in the picture. She lives with her mom, and her mom is super religious. Carrie, on the other hand, she's kind of like the Antichrist or something. I'm not sure, but her mom is not too happy about it. And basically, throughout the whole movie, it definitely shows elements of womanhood. There's like a scene where Carrie gets her period and she doesn't even know what's happening. And then there's like all these mean girls laughing at her. So we're discussing kind of female issues, just like topics such as periods in the earlier decades would not have been able to be shown on film because the male directors would have probably been like, yeah, who would want to watch that? And it's all about making that money. So, but now we can talk about them. Only in the horror context though. And yeah, basically Carrie, she has these powers and her mom is getting more and more scared of her. She locks her in a closet, she prays for her, and it's just not helping. I feel like this movie is just Christian trauma in a horror movie. Or like growing up as a girl meets Christian trauma. So I feel like, again, this really ties in with the whole feminism stuff. And also with the whole now coming religious fears, I'm not sure if you just heard it. There was like a siren outside. I love living in the city. But also, I wrote it down, I have to look. We had other issues in the 70s, such as the breakdown of the nuclear family and the societal breakdown and the dangers lurking within the suburban ideal after such an chaotic earlier decade. This also ties back into slashers with the whole being, you're not safe. Okay, so like basically the suburban idea was like this whole, especially if you like started in the earlier decades, I'm not sure which one, but like, the trend of like the 50s, 60s housewife, right? They were just like all zoned out on Xans, chilling at home. Well, not chilling, they were not that happy. But basically it was the goal, right? It was the goal to marry a man and be a stay-at-home wife, have children, the whole marriage, kids, picket fence life. And it was seen as desirable. And this was supposed to be a safe haven. But after such chaotic decades of the whole world was like all these protests and all this drama in the 60s, people felt like they could not be safe in their own home, especially with all the serial killers around. But also, the suburban idea, it was not only very idealistic, but it was not that progressive, I suppose, if you compare it to hippies, demonstrating and living in trees. It could feel, if you were like a wasp or like a wealthy straight white man, like your existence in a suburban neighborhood with your blonde pretty wife is being threatened. So all these privileged people felt like, their existence was not safe, and they didn't feel safety anymore. So we had movies like, Halloween, which I've mentioned earlier, just like kind of showing you like, yeah, no, actually you're not safe at home. And especially the teenagers were like main characters there. Okay, in the 80s we had movies such as Nightmare on Elm Street and Shining. Again, very famous movies, which I guess we could also put into the slasher category, because the 80s were also still very brutal. And what I've read basically was that the whole mindset of the 80s was just like, you're all doomed. This was also due to a recession, as far as I'm aware. And basically people were kind of hopeless again. Now really the teenagers being focus of most of the horror movies, because they are the next generation. They are the generation that grows up. Like, if you're already hopeless, just because of the state of the world, right? Just imagine how hopeless your son and how hopeless his situation is gonna be in like the next 10, 15 years. So this was basically like their mindset, being shown in those movies. Because like, if you think about a slasher, like Nightmare on Elm Street, basically what Freddy does is he targets special people, right? He just targets certain people. I'm not sure, does he have like a criteria? I know they don't sleep, but it's only because they don't want to get attacked by him. Maybe he goes for mentally weak people, I'm not sure. But he goes for young people most of the time. Because Freddy did, before he died, if you know the story, with the janitor. Yeah. But basically, he goes for teenagers, and the whole situation of the teenagers in many slashers is, okay, we're like a group of people, a group of friends, or we don't know each other yet, but now we're becoming friends. Our situation is hopeless. Oh, my phone just died, my parents don't believe me, the police, they're not after me, but they say I'm a suspect for the murders when I'm being chased. You know what I mean? And this is kind of like the situation of the teenagers, and this was just kind of to show how they felt in real life, with, for example, their parents also not taking them seriously. Now their concerns not being chased by a dream demon, but like scared of the future or something like that. And this also kind of translates that way onto the big screen. And also was for the man I've mentioned in like the earlier decade, kind of an outlet for feeling like everything is against you, especially if you're like a more privileged person, and especially also if you're like a younger person, of the recession, everything, just like, I don't know, feeling hopeless. And like everyone is out there to get you, like you're literally being chased every day by an ugly dream demon. I don't like Freddy, you might be able to tell. Okay. Then in the 90s, we have the whole riot core era. And basically just like the whole feminist movement and grunge and punk. I feel like it's a very, very nice decade for horror movies. I like it. We have movies such as The Craft and also Scream, and I think it's pronounced The Crucible, and Blair Witch Project. So we have like some found footage stuff, right? It's now starting to become a thing. With cameras and phones being used more for the average person, I'd say. And basically most horror movies of the decade, like going back to The Craft, are just like about friendship and feminism and girl power. I feel like girl power is a really big one. Movies kind of were supposed to show you like a cautionary tale, the terrifying effects of female power and female friendship. Like if women unite and if they don't fight each other, basically they just become evil witches. This was approached in a horrific way, kind of showing you like the dangers of these females. Like if you think like way back, women were seen as like the healers. I mean, like kind of Stone Age vibe, or like a bit later, but not like 1990s, like way back. Women were being seen kind of as the healers of groups always, and kind of like witches and the spiritual stuff, I mean, there were literal witch hunts. So, you know. And witchcraft was also a big topic now again, because as soon as females gain power, yeah, that's dangerous. Like, we don't want that. Like, ew. Like, what? You doing math? Like, you want to be into physics? You're a woman. That's witchcraft. That's not real. So basically, yeah. Also, if you think of the witch trials, I know the European ones are quite different from the American ones, but from the European ones are the ones I'm most familiar with, because I'm European, obviously. But like basically a lot of women who kind of had power, you could say. But like, yeah, women who did something men didn't want, for example, which you can interpret as power, I suppose. And basically women who were also into the whole healing stuff and into STEM. They were, you know, called witches to get rid of. And now it's happening again, just in the 90s. Yeah, it all had a very dark and gloomy aesthetic, with the whole grunge and punk thing being a thing. And also it really fitting in with witchcraft, like the whole grunge and punk thing, I feel like. Again, just like think of the craft, right? But like basically what a lot of movies with witches do is basically, if it's a more modern one, basically the witch is like the outsider, you know, the alternative looking person. They have black hair, not pink. Okay, don't come for me. And basically they do weird witchcraft, but then ultimately it helps to save the day. Or if we're like in the 90s, most mainstream movies, like this was also popular, but the more mainstream ones, again, such as The Craft, basically had like female friendships and female friend groups, and that's our topic. And we also had Scream, one of my favorite movies of all time. I really like the first two one, but yeah, Scream, lovely. Now we've got quite a few of horror. So how do you bring something new, something fresh onto the screen? It's by critiquing what's been there already. And this is kind of what Scream does, you know, there's like this super famous scene where they like explain all the tropes of horror movies. It's lovely. I love it. Oh, it's great. And I feel like this is also a really famous scene, and just like in the nature of what made the movie so famous. Like, yeah, it's a slasher, but well, we do have a cool final girl, of course, but we're also making fun of certain horror tropes, such as the person always coming back from death and having to shoot them again. And just like, who is behind the mask of those killers? Also an interesting tropes. The mask killer. There's a lot into it. If you want a video on it, just comment down below. But yeah, so this is also another trend in the 90s, you know. But even Scream, if you think about it, female friendship, in my opinion, was an important part of the movie. Like Sydney and Tatum was her name. It was something like that, I think. Before one of them dies, they were really close friends. And the film also kind of showed how they were helping each other, you know, with the whole serial killer attacks. And because she was helping Sydney so much, they had to get rid of her, basically. Such an interesting death scene too. But like, yeah, again, 90s, women have power and they're wearing black now and we're scared. Please stop. But like, yeah. And then in the 2000s, we kind of had a change from all the cool and interesting magic, you know, all the witchcraft stuff, to really brutal things. It went like from magic to gruesome. Like, it was an insane transformation. Like, we went from movies such as The Craft to movies like Saw. And Saw is one of the first, and to this day still, most watched and most, I don't know, like, I have the biggest fan base, make most money. It's just like one of the first and one of the most well-known, I was gonna say slasher. No, it's a new genre. It's like gore. Saw is like the most well-known and also one of the first gore movies. I know gore in itself is not a genre, and technically Saw is like a death game, which was also pretty new and just like a creative take on the whole gory stuff. It was very gory, it was very brutal. Some people called it torture censored, you know. Um, because it's just like that extreme. And if we compare it to the more light and fluffy, friendshipy, girly movies, horror movies from the 19s to the gore of Saw, it's an extreme jump. And this jump was kind of the influenced by 9/11. Um I don't think I have to explain it further, but basically people got kind of hardened to like all the brutality, you know, they were kind of used to it, and they also were scared, obviously. And it's just like very different from like the hopefulness to like all this super aggressive pessimism and yeah, brutalness. I don't know. And we also have a rise in found footage. We've also previously had the Blair Witch Project, like I've mentioned, but now there's like so many more found footage movies, and it basically just kind of shows this feeling of disconnect. Um, yeah, this disconnect is removed from help because like there was a serious security breach and like no one could stop it. No one could help. It happened. And now people are terrified something like that is to happen again, and they don't know who will protect them or how they should be protected. So I feel like again, Saw, for example, also kind of covers this, because if you think about how did the participants get to like, well, wherever they are, you know, like a warehouse or like the bathroom from the first one, they were basically just like kidnapped from their day-to-day lives for like small, in my opinion, most of the time way too small things they've done wrong to be suffering like this, especially in the later movies. Like bro just want an excuse to be cruel, like it's my opinion. But like yeah, basically it was also like supposed to show this like helplessness and these trust issues leading to like pure anxiety, as in it could happen to you any day you did something wrong. You could just be going to bed and waking up there, you know. And just like this acuteness and the extremeness of it is being shown throughout all this blood and aggression, in my opinion. Okay, now we have one of my favorite movies and one of a very nice decade in horror, in my opinion, the 2010s. Okay, I wrote a lot of stuff down for this one, but most important thing, Jennifer's Body came out. Actually, I think it came out in 2009, but like, it's fine, it's fine. We'll be talking about this movie at the end of the decade because it doesn't relate too much to either decade, like the 2010s or the 2000s. It's very on the cusp between between the decades, but I feel like it's kind of a thing in its own. But basically, in the 2010 society's issues were still like all the post 9/11 stuff, and just like the anxieties about racial identity, racial injustice, mental health. I'm not sure if you can say was being discussed, but it was like more of an issue, but like a relevant topic. Let's just say that, and just like personal anxieties too, especially with like the anxieties from 9/11. And we had movies like Midsummer. It came out at the end of the decade, and I feel like this kind of goes in trend with the 90s movies again, with the whole girly coded stuff. But basically this was like one of the, not one of the first, but like one of the more well-known movies which also did really good rating and box office wise, which is not very often that happens. So yeah, Midsummer is kind of about this girl, and she is on a trip, and they are in Sweden, Holland, somewhere there. I'm not too sure, I'm sorry. And basically they do all the traditions there, and basically this girl is not in a good relationship. It's a full-on cult movie, but it really well targets mental health and also like, you know, bad relationships. I'm not trying to spoil anything because it's a more newer movie, so I don't want to talk about the plots too open now. But like yeah, especially the whole beer and end thing, I think it really shows that we are now talking also about female anger, because with Carrie we had this, but I feel like Carrie was really advanced for its time. You know, especially you see in the end Carrie with like all the blood where she's yelling at prom, and it's unleashed female anger. We also had it in Pearl, female rage, you know, being a really trending topic, being like super cool, all these girly coded things, the female experience, all these things becoming trendy, even like with the whole mental health debate or like conversation that finally slowly has been starting. Yeah, I think it makes sense. And then again, we have like a lot of movies about terrorism, basically, or like, you know, like bad things happening inside the office, and just like the erosion of trust in the institutes. And yeah, we had basically, this is kind of what made me get into this video, because I saw like, I'm not sure what it was, if it was like a piece of an article or a tweet, because I don't have Twitter. I have no idea, but basically I just remember reading that home invasion is like a metaphor for not a metaphor for terrorism, and it or like for foreigners, you know, and it just like made so much sense in my opinion, because especially with like foreigners, you know, home invasion movies were also really trending at the time. I feel like those, yeah, I feel like the mental health movies were like the mental health were like the more important and more famous one, but like home invasion and like also haunted house movies, I feel like The Conjuring, you know, for example, like all of the 1,000 movies, I feel like they really showed this thing, you know, like with 9/11 happening, and I'm still coping with it to this day because the affected people are older now and everything. The evil people are now again foreigners, like just like where we started out in the video, basically. And now they're afraid of them basically stepping into their country. I like their home, which, if you're patriotic, both are really sacred places. You know, it's like you're supposed, at least supposed to be a safe sanctuary and everything. And this kind of feeling of comfort and safety was like taken from them with what happened with 9/11. So now they don't feel safe in their country or their home. And so this is how they're coping with it on the big screen. Because what horror movies do essentially is, in my opinion, you could say that, you know, it's like, you know, the whole quote with like art imitates life, life imitates art, blah, blah, blah. And basically, horror movies show and cover a lot of society's fears in a moment, because capitalism. But like, yeah, because basically you want a lot of people to relate to the movie. You want them to be scared. And what is more scarier than what is happening right now in front of their eyes? You know, Black Mirror, for example. I know it's not a movie, but they did a lot of basically, they only did tech horror, you could say. Really focused sci-fi, really focused tech horror heavy episodes. And then they stopped because it was too scary for them, because real life is so scary. Now, it was supposed to play in the near future, but then the near future came with like a few more seasons being released, and they were like, you know what, this is enough. We can't do this because the horror is like right in our life. We don't need to make an episode about it. And also, Black Mirror is like kind of short horror movies because the episodes are very long, so it counts. But yeah, basically, this is like the 2010s. And just like horror in itself, you know, what you want to do is, like I've mentioned before, you want a lot of people to relate, because then a lot of people are gonna give it a good rating. And a lot of people are going to want to see the movie, because if you have an issue, you talk about it with your friends. And if you have like an issue, you know, with like when it comes to women, basically, and their attractiveness. There's like, you know, if you're insecure, for example, about your nose, and then your favorite celebrity or influencer talks about how they used to be insecure of their nose, but then they just got over it. Or, I mean, most of the time they've probably had surgery now, lying about it, but you know, it helps you, you know, seeing issues you have being talked about by more important and famous people. So this is what horror does. Now, you see, we kind of stopped talking about the 2010 specifically because now we are in a new decade. And basically, I feel like this trend of personalized horror, I guess you could say it has always been a trend. This is like the whole core of my video. But I feel like now, especially for me at least, it's become very obvious. Especially considering the last two horror movies I've watched. I've watched Blink twice in the cinema a few weeks ago, I think. And if you don't know, it's basically about Epstein Island, which is very on topic. It's literally the director, she said it's not about it necessarily, but like it's about an island with millionaires or like billionaires and rich guys who do a lot of bad things to a lot of women, which is very on time, which is very topical if you think about it in so many ways. And yeah, I don't know what else to say. It's like so obvious. It's so relevant to this day, with like the whole Me Too thing and like finally talking about women's issues and them not being safe, not only in Hollywood but like in their everyday lives. And then another movie that's just recently come out is Substance, or like The Substance. And basically it also focuses on kind of like the fear of getting older. It's like a body horror movie. It's like the genre, but like the topic. I know we've kind of brushed over genres, but I feel like it would be an entirely different video. We covered it kind of, but especially in the later decades with like more and more movies, being so easier to produce basically. We just have like so many mini plots and tropes and genres, but like the topics all stayed the same. So like for example, yeah, you could have a haunted house movie, but like it would also still be could also still be about womanhood, so I feel like it's a distinction that has to be made. But like yeah, The Substance, it basically, from my understanding, focuses like on the fear of getting older. And I feel like for Gen Z and Gen Alpha, this is very, very, very relevant. From what I've seen, I feel like you all have heard. Okay, or maybe not. Maybe I'm just in a bubble. I'm not sure. But like the videos of like 13-year-olds or 12-year-olds wanting drunk elephant for Christmas. Which, if you don't know, it's like a very not very expensive, but like up there, skincare brand. And all these preteens just like rushing into Sephora and just like buying everything off the shelves and wearing makeup so much younger. And now if you in your early 20s, you get Botox, you get filler. And all these things are just really, really relevant. Especially for Gen Z, there has been like on TikTok this trend. I'm not sure if people were just like pranking, but they like duct tape parts of their face before they were going to sleep as to not cause any wrinkles. Yeah, I have no words for this, honestly. But like yeah, and also there were like straws, which were it wasn't just like a upright straw. It had like a little thing here, so you could drink out to the slit the straw had in order to not cause any wrinkles. And so I feel like The Substance and like other movies, especially body horror ones recently, just like covering this topic. And I also feel like with all the corona stuff, that kind of has been covered in the movies as well. I remember recently also there was like this movie His House, where I kind of realized the trend of movies becoming more artsy. I remember when I was younger and probably too young to watch horror movies, but I still did. There was like this movie called The Neon Demon, and I showed it to my friends, and no one really liked it, and no one really understood it. Basically, it was a movie and was kind of critiquing the modeling scene, all the body issues and body trends with back then not. I think this was before the Kardashians were famous. So like basically the trend wasn't curvy yet, but it was more like skinny, like the Tyrian cheek type of thing, and it was being critiqued. But like how it was being critiqued, it were women, and they were doing really weird things. And it's hard to explain because the movie, it was so artsy. There was like, the neon demon, they were just like not showing things directly, but like it was just like a lot of neon and a lot of super good cinema and like videography, And I feel like this is also gonna be a trend in the movies that are gonna come now. I haven't seen the substance yet, but I've heard it's also very artsy, and I feel like again this is a trend that could come back with like Gen Z being so focused on aesthetics. I'm not sure how good the Neon Demon did, but I feel like it was also very ahead of its time, just like Carrie. And basically, yeah, I feel like anything that looks really artsy and it's just like, I can really see like these 3 hour long super complicated weird movies coming back in trend, but only for like pretentious people, because like the attention span of the average person has gone downhill. So movies, I expect most movies becoming really a bit more shorter, around the 60 to 80, 90-minute mark, which does sound like a lot, but like if you think about super famous movies like The Wolf of Wall Street, it's 3 hours long. So is Titanic. And I feel like we won't have movies like this, except for like super weird artsy horror ones. For example, I've seen like this movie where it's supposed to be a horror movie because basically she's like the daughter of the devil. It's like a Slavic movie. I think it ties into some beliefs people had back then, but I'm not too sure, so I don't want to comment too much on it. But basically the whole movie is just like about her exploring life throughout the bodies and lives of different people. She can kind of like shapeshift. I think what she does is just like kill a person, take like their place. And it's supposed to be a horror movie, but it's more like a commentary of like the magic on life itself. And there's like the scene where it's just like showing a field and like a deer jumping through it, and then just like the subtitles of her talking about life. And I can see these horror movies really, really coming back. Also, what I think is there could be a lot of focus on AI. I feel like we've seen this before, with Megan. I think the movie has flopped a bit. I did not like it. I also don't feel like I'm gonna like any horror movies about AI because like artificial intelligence, I think, is scary to a lot of people because they don't understand it. And I don't know why they refuse to, just kind of read up on a topic on it, just kind of educate themselves. But like I'm in computer science, obviously. I mean, right. So like to me, AI, it's not that scary. I get that many people are like scared about their jobs, but like being so terrified of like the whole concept of AI and like ChatGPT taking over the world, it's ridiculous in my opinion. I get the fears and everything, but they come from being not educated. So I feel like it really depends on the opinions of the filmmakers who are currently making the big films. I don't know their opinions on it, but I feel like either we're gonna have like a lot of hate on AI, it like being the villain in many, many horror movies, like for example, I don't know, or like technology in itself. Like for example, you have like a twist on home invasion because there's no one really in there. It's just like your home security software deciding it wants, I don't know, it doesn't want to work for you anymore and wants to kill you or something like that. I can see these movies coming, like a lot of them. Or maybe, yeah, I feel like there's gonna be a trend with like a lot of anti-AI content, or just like not mentioning it at all. Because the horror people, I don't know. It depends on the personal opinions, but I feel like it's a heavily discussed topic, and either we're gonna be seeing a lot about it or none about it because we want to replace the writers with like softwares like the ChatGPT, and they don't want to draw too much attention to it. I'm not sure if that's what the writer's strike was about, and it was also about like women's rights and everything. But like, yeah, I feel like many people in the art industry are scared of losing their job to AI, so I can also see them just not mentioning it. Or again, there's gonna be a movie about just a person whose job was taken by some AI software, and now they want revenge. I can really see it going either way. But yeah, those are kind of my thoughts on horror movies we could be seeing a lot of in the future. And I am really curious what your opinions are. What horror movies do you want to come back? And also, what horror movies do you see coming and being produced a lot in the future? Tell me in the comments. And thank you so much for watching my first video essay. I know it was probably messy. I know the lighting is probably also not the best because, as you can see, this is not my usual setup for Let's Plays. There's no computer right in front of me. I'm sitting on my couch. I can't game from here. But yeah, if you have any constructive criticism, any idea how I can make these video essays a bit better, also like editing wise, just tell me down below. But like things like lighting, I think I'm just gonna have to figure it out, by doing some more. My sources will also be in the description box down below. And yeah, thank you guys so much for watching and see you again next time. Bye!